Welcome back. I'm Richard Haasnoot, and I want to welcome you to the Innovation Best Practices podcast. In every podcast, I share information with you that I hope can help you be more successful with your innovations. And speaking of being more successful, at my company, Innovate to Grow Experts, at the2ge.com, we help companies achieve dramatically better innovation results in 90 days or less, and we guarantee that result. And we can do that because we are the only innovation consultancy offering the 8 most proven innovation best practices. So if you want to have dramatically better innovation results in 90 days, just drop me an email at richard@i2ge.com. Well, let's get into today's podcast. Which is one of the most special ones I've had the opportunity to do in quite a while. We have a special guest, Lisa Lloyd. It's maybe a name that you've heard if you're a personal inventor, but you may not have heard otherwise, but you should have. Lisa has a record as a personal inventor that probably ranks her in the top 1% of successful personal inventors in the United States. She's gotten all kinds of awards, and she's been a Shark Tank winner. So Lisa is also our newest member of our Innovate to Grow Experts team and has added great skills and abilities, and she's taught yours truly many things along the way. Still have a lot to go, but I'm enjoying it, and if you have an opportunity to be interested in learning about Innovate to Grow Experts, Lisa may actually be the person that you talk to. So, with that as background, I've asked Lisa today to share with you the skills, processes, ways of thinking, whatever she wants to share with us that have helped make her the superstar personal inventor that she's been. So Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Richard, for having me. And I'm confident that I've learned more in the time that we've had to work together. As I've told you many times, your 8 most proven innovation best practices have helped me frame and articulate better than ever what it is that I've done that has worked. In the past, I could tell the story from each independent invention and what I did with them, but I couldn't necessarily frame it with the language that would translate across all the different categories and distribution channels. So I appreciate that.
Good. So are there skills, processes, and ways of thinking that have that you, as you look back at your success so far, and you've got more to go, that have helped make you the success that you have been so far?
Yeah, and it's funny because when I started, I was only 23 years old, and I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew is that I wore my hair up in a French twist. I had been in the Navy, and when I came out of the Navy, my hair was at that ugly in-between stage growing out because it had been cut off for so long. And when I would go to work, I worked at a TV station, and I was always asked by the on-air talent how I wore my hair in a French twist. That was my easy updo while I was going through the in-between stages. I'm sure women will resonate with that.
I haven't got a clue, so.
Yeah, so I thought, well, gosh, it's really easy for me. I'm not really sure what the challenge is, but it became clear that most women just weren't as ambidextrous. Plus, because my hair was shorter, it was easier. And the longer your hair is, the harder it is to fashion. And so at that time, this was back in the early 90s, women were going to salons if they were getting a fancy updo, or if they did it at home. It was before jaw clips were even really trendy. It was a lot of bobby pins and a lot of work. And I thought, well, gosh, there's got to be a better way. And I had recently seen a story with, Tamima Edmark had invented the topsy tail. And I don't know what TV show she was being interviewed on and talking about her umpteen millions that she had made. And I thought, well, if she can do it, I can do it. I was young enough and dumb enough at the time to think I could do anything, which really worked in my favor because I really had no idea what I was doing. But I went to work cutting up barrettes that I had. I bought a few things. At the time, you had to go to the library still. We didn't even have the internet to really research what other products were out there and what the business models were for making and selling them. And we thought we were going to make them and sell them direct and then eventually make our way into retail stores. And during that time, I found a manufacturer that was willing to help me manufacture it as an investor as opposed to paying him, because I had no money at 23. And he was very helpful. In fact, we went through several iterations through that process because I knew nothing about tooling and injection molding and all of that. And we got our first 500 made, and we assembled them and put them in these ridiculous little card packages that we had printed. It was awful. And went door to door selling them at salons. And while we started to see some traction, another person came on the market with something called a Hairdini, and it was a direct competitor. Nothing had ever been done to put your hair up in a French twist. This was a brand new tool. And at that point, you had ornamental hair accessories. You didn't have something that was hidden inside your hair. It was an entirely new approach to styling your hair, other than bobby pins. So to be competitive, I had read, David Pressman has a book called Patent It Yourself. And in the back of the book, there was a list of independent inventors organizations around the country, which at the time there were none in Arizona, and some information about licensing, which I had never heard of. And so we had quite a bit of publicity locally. We lived in Tucson at the time, and we took that publicity and the sales traction that we had at that point and started submitting the product to Goody, who was at that time #1 in the market, and Conair, who was #2. And I got a negotiation going with Goody, and then I got a phone call saying, "I'm sorry, Lisa, we're going to have to pass after all. We're being acquired by Newell Rubbermaid, and I don't know if I'm going to have my job in a week." And I said, "Well, then that means you have to hurry up and make a decision, not put it off." And she laughed also and said, I love that. Keep going. I really think this is a great product, and you're going to be successful, but I just can't do it. So I hung in there for a few months, and my mother called me one day and said she had seen something in the store. There were only a couple SKUs of this company called Skuncy. She wasn't even sure how to say it. She said Skunky or Scrunchy. I'm not really sure what it's called. And we contacted them and submitted all the same materials to them. And they called us within 24 hours and said, "Who are you talking to?" Of which I told him, "Well, we're talking to Goody." And he said, "I want you to stop talking to everybody. We're interested in licensing." And it was only a couple weeks later that I had my first check for $60,000. And keep in mind, I was 23 and I worked for a television station making $13,000 a year. And I got my first check, $60,000 a year.
Yeah.
I like this. I think I'll do it again. Now, that's the short version. But I've done that 7 times over, and I have 12 patents between the 7 products, and most of which were licensed. Only one did we manufacture and sell. And I'd have to say that the common denominator in all of them that made them successful in hindsight was that there was a real problem to be solved and a dramatic difference that we could make. So, for example, with the French twister, you had to pay $50, $60 at a salon or know how to do it at home with 50 bobby pins, and that was very challenging for middle America. So it was a dramatic improvement over the alternative ways. The other thing was that we were able to reduce it to the ridiculous. It's one of my favorite phrases, and that's something I have consistently done with all of my products. They are really simple. In other words, if I can't explain it in 3 simple steps or less, then it's too complicated. And when you're selling things like hair accessories, for example, that you need somebody who's maybe a mom and she's busy and she's in middle America, she doesn't want an instruction book. She wants 3 quick steps and preferably even 3 pictures that tell her the entire story. And I found that to be very helpful. And in fact, that led to some innovation around the packaging. So with the French twister, we did 4-color art. And at that time, there were no 4-color packaging of items in the entire industry, in the entire category. It was black and white. If it was illustrated at all, it was a black and white line drawing. It wasn't a photograph. And we did a trifold with 4-color art showing not only how to do it, but alternative methods for using it in your hair to create different styles. And even a candid shot of me sitting in they let me do it. I was on the packaging, which was really fun again at that age. But sit in a barber chair, and there were two girls whispering in my ears, like we were having fun. And my hope at that point was, look, they're selling beer with girls running down the beach, so why can't we sell hair accessories with girls having fun, right? So that was brand new, and it was a huge success. In fact, it was on the What's Hot list at Walmart for its first 10 weeks in the store.
Wow.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah.
So keeping it simple, solving a major problem, and understanding cost. I'm not sure how I had intuitively known at the time, how I could have possibly known at the time, but I paid close attention to the cost. I understood that people weren't going to spend a lot of money for a simple little tool, and wanted to be competitive with other tools, maybe that didn't do the same thing, but were competing for the business to style hair, right? So I wanted to keep it around a couple bucks, $2 or $3. And that meant innovating. We looked at metals, we looked at plastics, all the different ways to do it for the French twister. And I consistently did this with each of the other products following that as well. Naming it was a big deal. All of the names that I came up with for my inventions have been used by the companies. They've never changed the name. And again, one or two words that very quickly define it. So the French twister, obviously, you know what it is. It makes a French twist in your hair. Clicks was a contour clip that it clicks on your hair, but it was a new variation on an old product. So this was, unlike the French twister, which solved a problem for a style that had been around forever, but no tools to do it. This was a tool that had been around forever, but slid out of your hair. And by adding a comb action to it, it became a no-slip grip. It stays in your hair, and it doesn't matter how fine or thin your hair is. It had a really strong hold, so we called it Clicks.
Good.
Yeah, and then overall, those were the consistent, I think, common denominators that ultimately brought it together. So when you think about, for example, with Innovate to Grow experts, we use the 10 types of innovation and the 30 dimensions of value. I can definitely see where those values were considered, although I didn't know how to label them at the time. Those emotional values or functional values, as well as the innovation process when it came to packaging, not just the product itself, but the instructions and all of the delivery on the product as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's very well said. I mean, there's a number of things that you said, Lisa, that I just absolutely love, and I want to underscore for the listeners of the podcast. You started off by saying the phrase, there's got to be a better way, and that's exactly the language I have used so many times. And it represents an attitude that automatically, at least for me, and it sounds like for you too, kind of unlocks permission and a path to go find a better way. Because you know there's a better way, and it just needs to be found. So it's
Right.
it's a simple phrase, but said with sincerity and real curiosity and intent, it's a good thing to unlock. And the other thing, a couple of other things that you said I want to underscore. Make sure you're solving a real problem. And I know you've worked with a lot of inventors that come to you, and I've worked with a lot of innovators at major corporations who are intent on solving something that you kind of stand there and scratch your head and say, and this is a problem? And it may be in a very small scale, but customers and consumers are interested in and have time to solve those sort of bigger things on their radar screen. The small annoyances, occasional annoyances, are not the things that they're going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out. So make sure it's a real problem. And you underscored dramatic difference, and certainly we can talk more about that. And the other thing that you talked about that was an innovation in your category was from black and white packaging to four-color packaging and photography and that sort of thing. It's absolutely, if you've got a great idea, make it easy for someone to make the purchase decision.
Right.
At the point of purchase. Oh, this is what it is. Oh, and this is how you use it? Into the shopping cart it goes. I mean, it sounds simplistic, but all of us, I think, can relate to it. I've stood in a store and picked something up and go, boy, I like the name. Yeah, it's a problem I wish I could solve. And I'm standing there trying to read it or something and going, nah, it sounds like I've got more of a problem figuring how to use this thing than the problem. So you just kind of put it back. So all of those are great insights. So
and you only get a small amount of real estate to do that with. So you really have to maximize that. And I think this is where it becomes very important. I'm mission critical, because if you have a great product, but it isn't marketed, packaged, sold properly, then it doesn't matter. People won't understand it. And so if that's all you get, because you can't count on, for example, a salesperson at Walmart standing there and explaining it or pitching it to people like you could with a kiosk in the mall or television advertising or whatever, then you really need to do everything that you can to maximize that real estate. And to your other point, Richard, too, small problem versus big problem. What's interesting in working with you, I think one of the things that I have had to reconsider is how to measure what a big enough problem is. And there's been a paradigm shift in my thinking. It's not so much identifying whether it's a big enough problem, but can I solve it better enough, to your point, that there's a dramatic enough difference to cause people to make the switch. So maybe it's just a small annoyance. But if it's going to cost me the same amount as what I'm paying now and make my life that much easier, sure, even though it's not that big of a problem, if it's $3 to buy and it's going to make my life that much easier, that's disposable money for me, no problem.
Yeah, no, that's well said. In addition to a small amount of real estate, when you also need to realize that consumers give you a very small amount of time, and the amount of time can be measured in as little as 1 second or 2 or 3 seconds, and as they're scanning and looking, and at the point of purchase, if you don't have packaging, if you don't have a name that kind of stands out from the crowd, when you're thinking about an innovation, you think some people think, well, all I have to do is make it available for sale. Whoops, time out. I wish it were that easy, but it's not.
The old field of dreams, if you build it, they will come.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's good. Well, let's move on to the other one. I think a story that a lot of the listeners would love to hear, because it's topical and something they all know about, is take us through your Shark Tank progress from getting into it, how you got into it, and I know you have some interesting stories to tell about the actual program itself and how it came out, and it was quite an adventure.
Absolutely. And what's most interesting to me about it is that it was the only time that I ever actually manufactured, imported, sold in addition to, as opposed to just inventing and licensing. And there was a reason I stuck with licensing all those years, but someone talked me into it. And so I had a massive learning curve. But Shark Tank came to me, one of the producers came to me at a trade show. I had just won a pitch competition at the Direct Response Television Expo, and asked me if I was interested in being on a new reality show being produced by Mark Burnett. And I laughed and said, no, thank you, because I knew he was the producer of Survivor, and I wasn't interested in eating bugs for my business. And there's not a lot I won't do, but that's definitely on the list.
Yep.
And she said, no, that's not what it is. I'll send you some emails. So I got in the office Monday morning following the show, and there were several emails from her with reels from Dragon's Den out of the UK, and said this was the program that he had purchased, and they were putting an American spin on it. It would be called Shark Tank instead. And I thought, okay, yeah, I can do this. And the cutoff for the auditions was Friday, and she asked me to mail in a tape answering questions. Just turn the camera on and answer these questions for us, please. So I didn't even get to it till Wednesday, overnighted it Thursday for Friday delivery, which was the cutoff. And I got a call the following Monday that I'd been selected to be on the show. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was a quickie. But of course, they didn't have hundreds of thousands of submissions like they do now, I'm sure, but tens of thousands certainly, and I was very fortunate. What most people don't realize is that they select, this may have changed, but at the time they selected 150 people to come in and actually film, and only a approximately 50 actually end up making it on the show. And of course, that's not just who gets a deal, or even for that matter doesn't get a deal, but who makes for the best television. So you could get a deal or not, and it wasn't of any real consequence to whether you made it on the show or not. Then after the program, the Sharks have the opportunity to vet you. They want to make sure you're not actually wanted in 50 states and you were telling the truth on the air.
Yeah.
So while they're doing their due diligence, and I did a deal with Damon John and Barbara Corcoran. While they were doing their due diligence, I continued to manufacture and actually struck a deal with my factory because I had orders for Christmas and Damon wasn't funding quick enough for me. So the factory in China, I'd already ordered my first container. This would be my second. They agreed to give me 90-day terms. So I got factory financing out of it. And with the cash, because my customers were all COD, so I was able to float that and got through my second container while I was waiting for that deal to fund. The experience was very interesting. I learned a lot more about the business than I expected to learn. So, for example, when I was inventing this, it started with a woman coming to me with another product that was basically a hair accessory jewelry box, and it was very large. And I took it to I took it to Conair and Helen of Troy and a few companies that I had relationships with, and they all said the same thing. There was something there. It was clever, but it was too big. It couldn't be merchandised properly at the price point. It was looking at like a $20 or $30 price point, and it just didn't make sense. It was too simple. And I took it and I took her patent, licensed it from her, redesigned it, innovated on top of that, turning it into a toy, and repurposed it as a toy with secret compartments for storage. Same thing, still hair accessories and jewelry, but for that matter, also cell phones and all kinds of Game Boys, CDs. We had all kinds of different kinds of compartments to go in the treasure chest pets, by the way, is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So your listeners may want to know that, TC Pets. And that video, that Shark Tank video, I believe, is on my website as well. But when I did that, I knew, because I'd been in the business of inventing and licensing, I knew that companies needed a patent on it and to license it. And I believed that I needed a patent on it to create not just a competitive advantage, but a barrier to entry, because I didn't have enough money to go to market fast enough. And I was concerned that someone would knock us off with bigger pockets and beat us to market. So we made them out of foam that was formed and not stuffed. And it kept the shape and continuity depending on which body style you bought, which was really cute. We were able to get 3 patents on it. We did 3 designs and 1 utility. The utility covered all the designs, obviously. And in our time coming to market, actually while I was getting the prototypes, even my factory sent me a prototype of one that was just stuffed in an effort to convince me to bring my costs down. And while I appreciated their concern, it wasn't patentable the way they sent it to me. So fast forward 2 years after Shark Tank, and then at that point we were in over 400 stores, another product came out called Stuffies, and it was exactly what the factory had sent to me. And had I considered that someone else would go around me using something that wasn't patentable, that couldn't get any IP on it with deeper pockets, I probably would have reconsidered the whole thing. I learned a lot about shipping, especially. So there's something called dim weighting. And it's just dimensional weight. So if something's very light, and of course these were, but they're big and bulky, then the shippers will add, because you're taking up space in the containers and the trucks and the planes, they'll add cost. So it's not just based on weight anymore. So light is great up to a certain dimension. So we designed our boxes to stay just within the limits, which meant we could only put 9 in a box to stay within the dim weight, which I thought was brilliant until we found out that we were getting probably about 70% of the time chargebacks on the dim weighting, because when they would come across the ocean, the humidity in the water in the container would cause the weight of the boxes stacked on top of each other to bulge on the sides.
Wow.
And that little bit of bulging cost me an extra 40 to 60% in cost of shipping.
Wow.
And it was things like that crushed me, that I didn't know how to innovate for.
Yeah.
When you have a stuffed animal that's very light, normally you pack them all down, you're pushing them inside the box, and it doesn't matter. You open the bag and they kind of fluff back out. But you couldn't with ours, because if you crushed them, they would not come back to shape again. So lots of lessons from that one. I could talk about that probably for days, let alone the time that we have today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, as I said in the beginning, it was quite the adventure. I mean, it was when you departed from your licensing success path and kind of went to go be able to go do it yourself, and the learning curve associated with that, but also the recognition that you got from it were all very beneficial and have kind of gotten you to where you are today. And I mean, it's the lessons and everything and the insights and the practicality and everything that you've had to go through is, at least in the field where you and I working with Fortune 100 and 500 sort of companies, a very fresh perspective about the realities of what it, you have these wonderful, exciting words written on paper. They're called a concept. and you get all jumping up and down. Hey, I got this great score. And you and I both know, and since I've been a business operator and had to take things from idea all the way to the marketplace, we know it's an adventure. But it's not only an adventure, but it's also what you just shared with my listeners, and that is that innovation does not stop with actually developing the idea. I mean, you were learning about the way things were shipped and everything, and trying to bring innovation to that process, only to be messed up by humidity from the ocean. And so another learning opportunity. So
again, that's one of the many really wonderful valuable things that I've learned in working with you, and I would say have had the privilege of participating in. When we collaborate with clients, having people from all the right departments, as the Good to Great book says, right? Not just having the right people on the bus, but in the right seats. Having the right people in the room to innovate with each of the perspectives, so that you get the multi-dimensional innovation out of it, with taking into consideration packaging and shipping and point of sale, and not just the end user, I believe is what ultimately gets you that and delivers on that dramatic difference that we talk about all the time.
Right, it does. Well, good. I think we have whet our listeners' appetite.
Great.
And this is the first in a series of podcasts that Lisa and I are going to do. We're going to be talking about more specific topics relative to successful innovation in the series of podcasts that will follow this. So you'll be sure to want to tune in, because Lisa's got some very good stories. I've got some very good stories, but also just some good fundamental advice about what really works. And for both Lisa and I, we both have a strong interest in things that are proven to work. I'll leave theory to other people, and I'll be glad to listen to them when their theories become actual working things. So what you will get from our conversations is proven, practical advice that we know works, and that's why we describe our 8 best practices as the 8 proven innovation best practices. So, Lisa, it's been a hoot. I've enjoyed it. I've learned even more from listening to this, which I always appreciate, and urge my listeners to tune in to the next podcast, where Lisa and I will be back to help you learn about how to be more successful with your innovation. Have a great day.